All right, you want to talk about 12 Geniuses? Guys, Don MacPherson, he's the host of 12 Geniuses, one of the greatest podcasts I've ever come across. It's a podcast for curious and voracious learners, a 5-time entrepreneur. Don spent 25 years researching the employee and customer experiences, the attributes of great leadership, and how healthy organizational cultures are created and what keeps them going. How are they sustained? Don's figured it out. Now, what I love about Don is his incredible optimism. When I talked to Don, I literally felt lighter after our conversation. Like, this guy is next level, okay? And he has a lot of variety regarding his skill sets, from AI to biotechnology, aging to addiction, cybersecurity and privacy and climate change and trust. Don uses these insights to help business leaders better understand what these trends are, how they're positioned to disrupt companies and industries, and how new value can be created for those willing to make the necessary changes. And on top of all that, Don is a world traveler. The guy he's everywhere at once. He's all over the world. He's a jet setter. He's just a super unique person with an incredible perspective. And one of my favorite parts about Don is that he is a highly successful entrepreneur, no doubt about it. Yet he's incredibly humble and he genuinely cares about helping people. So his whole podcast is to help people understand the change that's happening in the world and to keep leaders informed. On top of that, he's always been a part of his community, like Big Brothers, Big Sisters type of community. He's helped some young teens in jail that have made some bad mistakes, and he was a mentor for one for many years. And we talk all about the connection that he made while in these mentorship programs. So although he's reached a very high point in his life, he's not done giving. His purpose is truly helping people, being there for people, and educating people. And I think after you listen to this episode, you're going to feel like I did. You're going to feel much lighter, much more optimistic. So Don, thank you for spending time with me at Hero Front. You're a true gem, and I'm so glad that you're in my life. All right, everybody, let's get after it.
But yeah, like, how are you able to, like, I guess you could explain to us and the listeners just, where you were raised, a few of your inspirational, mentors, and then your career field, and how you're able to travel to all, around the world, around the US, and meet all these incredible people, and how you got into the podcast. I know that's a lot, but I've been wondering, and I just got to know.
Well, I live in Minneapolis. And I was born probably 5 miles from where I live right now. But my formative years were on the Iron Range in Minnesota. And that's a lot of mining up there, forestry, outdoors people. So I was a hunter. I fished when I was young. And I would say that I have a lot of Iron Range in me. These are really, really tough people, hardworking people. A lot of blue collar. And so while I've, worked in business now for 30 years, I still have that kind of work ethic in me. I worked in a mine for a couple of summers during college. So that's part of who I am. And I was always fascinated with exploring and understanding the world better. And that was kind of what led me to travel. I've always been fascinated by people who are different than I am. I remember the first time I saw an African-American man. I grew up in a very, very white town, and I just was fascinated by this guy, and I wanted to meet him, and I was 5. And I didn't know what to do, but I remember passing by him in a restaurant and touching him and thinking to myself, now he just thought I brushed against him. He was wearing shorts, and I just touched his leg. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's the same as me. Mm-hmm. His skin feels like my dad's skin, and I've just been fascinated by people different than me. And so that's led me around the world. Asia, South America. I've been on all 6 continents, 74 countries.
Oh my
I have
gosh.
4 trips to Europe planned this year. And I just love to explore new cultures and meet new people and understand what makes them tick and try to connect with them in significant ways. And so that's, and I think the podcast 12 Geniuses is an extension of this. I'm very, very curious about people, as you are. You asked this question, how did you get this way? That's what I want to know too. And so I've been a traveler and an explorer. And so that really motivates me and excites me.
Definitely. You have a lot of qualities of people in the military, I would say, with your your appreciation of other cultures, the wanting to travel and get to know things different than you. That's what the military is all about. We're a melting pot of cultures and different backgrounds. And so we're very able to adapt quickly. We share stories that are very personal, pretty much right out the gate, because we know our time is limited, right? If you were stuck with the same group of coworkers for 20 years, you'd probably be a little reluctant, especially at first, to share personal things about you, right? Because now you're stuck with these people who know these things about you, right? And in the military, we know that our time's limited. And so I've noticed we're a bit more forthcoming with how we're feeling and the backgrounds that we come from. And we've all kind of, for the most part, have a deep appreciation for that. So Don, a lot of your qualities, and I think, and you talk to a lot of veterans, so they probably resonate with you as well. Just who you are as a person is very military friendly, I guess. Has anyone ever told you that before?
No, definitely not. And when I was in high school, I tested for all of the different branches of the military, and it was fascinating. But the thing that I couldn't get over is having somebody tell me what to do. I've never been good at that in my life. Just like I like suggestions. I'm much better with suggestions. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm giving away my freedom. If we did a values exercise, freedom is always going to come in the top 2. Now it would be probably top 3. My family is first and health is second, but freedom, autonomy has always been toward the top of my list. That's why I've been an entrepreneur. But that was the thing that held me back. I'm very fascinated by, especially now that I've had access to people like Master Gun Stalker, and one of my really good friends was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and I'm fascinated by the work that you do. And you alluded to something that I do find really, really fascinating, and that's around leadership. And how do you get, when you're constantly changing your team and you have these 2-year assignments, how do you earn trust really quickly? And how do you get people motivated? How do you learn, what people's strengths are, what people's weaknesses are? How do you develop that team very, very quickly? I think that's very fascinating in the military, that in corporate America and other organizations, we don't necessarily do very, very well. And you all do it great. It's amazing. I'm seeing a lot of case studies, and I know, how do you do that so quickly? It's amazing.
I'll tell you what, I've thought about that a lot. And I think the number one thing that I've noticed is purpose. If they can see and feel the purpose, anything's possible. Anything is on the table at that point. You take the purpose away, maybe they're not sure of the vision or they don't get it, you're going to struggle with that team. So I always make it a point to, I've worked on my communication and my speaking skills for years now because I've seen the value in it. But to articulate that purpose, to articulate the mission, mix that in with transparency, with getting their ideas, mix that in with being vulnerable with my own struggles, my own stories, strengths and weaknesses, all that wrapped up in a nutshell surrounds purpose. I think that's the foundation. Purpose and trust, I think, go a long way in that rapid team building. And especially in a deployed environment, there's a lot of purpose there, right? You're kind of fighting for your life, your country's freedom. There's a lot of purpose. And so when we do the joint force missions, we are on board. We are all willing to do whatever it takes to make that mission happen because the purpose is just through the roof at that point.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of organizations miss out, is they don't clearly articulate it, and it doesn't make its way down to the team level or the individual level. Like, why am I doing this? Where does it fit in? how is it going to make the organization better, stronger? That's something that I agree with you. It's an important thing that should be communicated and articulated, but not everybody does it effectively.
Are you a fan of Steve Jobs, since that was like his thing?
Yeah, and so I did an episode recently on purpose with Dr. Richard Leiter, and he's one of the godfathers of the purpose movement. So he's nearly 80 years old and has written 11 books on the topic of purpose. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's
so purpose is his purpose.
Yes, and in fact, he had an opportunity to meet Viktor Frankl, and I'm trying to think of who else he met, who was formative, but somebody in that kind of same echelon as Viktor Frankl. And he's like, I've served on a board with him, and I ran a nonprofit where he was on the board, and almost every meeting he would say, well, why are we doing this? Why? It was just always back to the purpose. How does this serve our mission? How does this serve our purpose? So that's a great starting point for an organization and for a leader to kind of remind everybody, this is why we're here.
Definitely. So Don, so you're an entrepreneur. That's your job. 5-time entrepreneur. I don't even know what that means. I'm like on the opposite spectrum. I'm on a contract for the government. Although it does draw a lot of entrepreneur minds to the positions, I will say, as you get higher in the ranks, you have a lot more freedom and control over the mission. And so you could exercise those. It just takes a little while. You got to be patient. But so 5-time entrepreneur, why don't you run me through what exactly that is?
I'll start back. My first job out of school back in 92. So I'll be celebrating 30 years in the business world now this year. My first job was in financial services. I enjoyed it because I learned a lot, but I knew that this was not for me. I wasn't going to spend 10, 20 years working my way up the ranks. And so I sold everything I had and bought a one-way ticket to Germany. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to figure out who I am, what I'm made out of. And I ended up living there for about 11 months. And then when I came back, I got a temp job and started working in human resources for the same company that I had left before. And there were 2 people that I was watching in the office. One eventually became my business partner, and he'd show up at 10 o'clock and he'd leave at 6. And he kind of had a really great schedule in my mind as a 24, 25-year-old guy. And then there was somebody else in the cubicle next to him who was on the corporate path. And she was coming in at 8 and leaving at 5 and had to write all these goals. Well, he was a contractor, she was an employee. And I said, I want what he has, because he kind of dictated, he negotiated this contract every year. And it was very clear whether he was successful or not. They just wouldn't hire him if he wasn't successful. So I kind of watched him, and he was about my age, a little bit older than I was. And I just thought what he was doing was what I wanted to do, having this flexibility, this freedom. He could bring on any other clients if he wanted to. And so we ended up being business partners a couple of years later. And what I like about it is risk and creating something from nothing. And so that's what I've done with all of my companies. Is there was nothing before I started it, and then we build it into something. Now, the 4th company, I guess, that I had, we ended up selling it for a large sum of money to a Fortune 500 company. And that's what has allowed me to start 12 Geniuses and kind of reinvent myself and become a family man. So the company sold on the day my first daughter was born. So just a crazy, crazy day. And and so
it's a lot of emotions that day.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Talking with reporters, and then my partner calls me and she says, where are you? I said, I'm out in the parking lot. I'll be right in. She's like, it's on, it's starting. So I was like, okay, this is it. And then a few hours later, we were holding our daughter, and just emotionally, an incredible emotional roller coaster. But this idea of risk is something that I enjoy. I enjoy being responsible and taking risks, and that's why I moved to Germany, and that's why I'm an entrepreneur. And and start companies. I love to know that success or failure depends on me largely. Not, when you become part of a team, then there are other people who are influencing that, but I like to be really invested in success or failure. So I know, and that was the thing that I had difficulty with in corporate America is we had tens of thousands of employees. I didn't know what I was doing, if it made a difference or not.
Right. I love that you mentioned risk, because that's immediately what jumped out at me as you were telling me your story. Because that's why someone like you fascinates me, because like my dad's your traditional, he's very successful, but he's your picture perfect baby boomer, right? Born in West Virginia, rags to riches, enlisted, switched to officer, became a commander, then a GS-13. He did everything right, saved his money, invested in safe stocks. Now he's living his best life in a near $1 million home in Virginia. So he is the picture perfect baby boomer, right? Living off your laurels. And I attempted, that was my template and many other people's templates. But then there's people like you who throw the template out the window. You know what I mean? So like what we thought was the only path, which is high school, do your best, do your SATs, get into a good college, try to get all the benefits you can, whether that's through the military or whatever, to try to make that future you have less bills. But then there's someone like you who says, forget all that. I'm going to Germany. And I feel like it takes a tremendous amount of confidence in yourself to do that. I mean, did you feel that way?
Not necessarily, because at the time I didn't, but looking back, yes, absolutely. First of all, you have to understand I had nothing to lose, right? I had no money.
You had the fear of failure, though. That
sure.
could be interpreted as something to lose, whether we like acknowledge it or not. A lot of us are reserved from the fear of falling flat on our face.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I'll tell you, back in 1990, it was the summer after the Exxon Valdez spilled in Alaska. I drove up to Alaska with 19 other people from Minnesota. It was about a 5,000-mile trip, and we were going to work there that summer. And I had $200 in my pocket. Now, $200 went a lot further then than it does now, but it's not a lot of money. And so I actually failed on that trip because I mentioned the Exxon Valdez because of that oil spill. Well, this is a year later, and the fish that we were up there to catch, it was a really bad year for that. So I didn't get a job. I was playing basketball, and it ended up breaking my arm.
Oh, wow.
And I had to come home with my tail between my legs, ask my mom for money to fly me home. I had my friend sell my car up there because I wasn't driving 5,000 miles by myself. And I did forgive myself. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this again. This time, when I moved to Germany, I had $2,000 in my pocket, which was a lot more money. Still not a lot of money. So it's a runway, but a pretty short runway. And I really wanted to see what I was made out of. I've been fascinated by immigrants who come to the United States with $20 in their pocket, and they get a part-time job or whatever, and then they own a grocery store, and then they own a chain of stores, and just these types of success stories. Well, I wanted to see if I could do that. And that was what Germany was all about. But to get back to your earlier point about having confidence, a lot of people come to me and say, I want to do what you do. I want to own my own business. I want to have this and that. And I ask them 3 questions. The first question I ask them is, how confident are you in you? Because if you don't think you can do this, you probably are right. I mean, you really, really have to be confident that what you're going to embark on is going to be successful. The second thing I ask them is, how much money do you really need? Be honest with yourself. Now, when we started the previous business that I mentioned to you, I was living on about $1,000 a month. My mortgage was $800. And I had people renting from me who paid that mortgage. So I kind of had this strategy in place, and I knew I could live really, really lean. Well, if you're 40 and you have 2 kids and, one of the kids has a health issue, you better be very clear with what your financial constraints are. So that's the second question. How much money do you really need? And most people underestimate that. The third question is, can you sell? And I just added that recently, but when you're an entrepreneur, a big part of what you do is sell. You have to sell yourself. You have to sell your company. You have to sell to people you may be hiring.
Wow. So Don, I really admire your foresight going into the risk taking, knowing your limitations, expecting to live lean and finding creative ways around that. I mean, it's genius. I mean, it really is. I think you'd make a fantastic Air Force officer.
I think it's too late for me, Josh.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, but yeah, you would have been good at that. But yeah, I'm very impressed with you, Don. I didn't appreciate the entrepreneurial mindset until much later in life. And then it's very empowering when you can change lives and you can make something out of nothing. You brought something into the world that people now use and rely on. There's something very purposeful and empowering and motivating. And each one of those wins just brings you to the next door, the next challenge, the next win. And it seems to just get bigger and bigger, right? It's like our mind is like, the bigger it is in our head, the more success that we have, the bigger things we can accomplish. So it's like just that whole process is incredible. And your foresight as a young man was unreal.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Josh, because I didn't always have this mindset, but I learned it. And I surrounded myself with people who had the mindset, and I just allowed it to rub off on me, particularly with the entrepreneurship. I just found mentors, and people didn't even know they were my mentors, but I was just observing and soaking in what they were doing. And there were a couple of people in my company, my business partners, who had an idea of where this organization could go. I was like, really, you think? They had big, grand ideas. And, the more they repeated it, the more I bought into it. It's like, oh, you're right. I started to put the puzzle pieces together. And now I'm talking with futurists on a regular basis for my podcast. And I've got 12 futurist episodes coming up over the summer. And so now I'm looking out 10, 20, trying to look out what life might be like 50 years from now. And so, that rubbed off on me. But it wasn't innate. I definitely didn't have that in my teens, my 20s, or, until my 30s, I would say. And now it's just who I've become.
Absolutely. And I love what you've become. I think it's fantastic. So going back to the talking points that you sent me, I thought was really awesome to read, actually. So a part of this, it says, my mission is to help people reach their full human potential. That can be helping them grow and develop at work, remove the obstacles of addiction, and overcome poverty and lack of opportunity. So I thought you were going to go in a different direction with that. When you said reach their full human potential, I thought you were going to come at it like mentorship coaching, leadership coaching, lessons learned, but you went to addiction and poverty and lack of opportunities. I thought that was really interesting. Would you be able to speak on that?
Sure. If you think about what I've done over the course of my career, it's been, I've been a mentor for 30 years. So this will mark my 30th year. When I got my first professional job, I immediately became a mentor. And I was actually a tutor in the Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center. And that's the county that I'm in right now. And I was a tutor to a young man who was 17. He had committed a very violent crime, and he was going to be sent away for a long time. And we were waiting for his 18th birthday. And so he had requested tutoring, and I volunteered to do it. And throughout this experience, and it was just once a week for a couple of hours, sometimes I'd come in and have dinner with him and the other people in his unit. We developed a bond. Now, we couldn't have been more different. He was a total gangster from Kansas City. I'm this white kid from northern Minnesota, but for whatever reason, he loved me and I loved him. And we were able to develop this bond very, very quickly. And I looked at him, strong kid, really, really unbelievably strong, probably 185 pounds, but incredibly strong. And he wanted to be an athlete. He liked football. And I thought to myself, after our tutoring of, 4 or 5 months of tutoring him, what could this kid have been? So I saw potential in him as an athlete. What could he have been if he had had the right mentorship, if he had met somebody who cared about him, who loved him, who could have guided him in the right direction. And from that point, I started to become a big brother and work with kids who are younger and try to help them overcome whatever obstacles they had, whether it was growing up in a single parent home or being impoverished, whatever. So that's why I mentioned poverty. Is there are just so many people out there who have the potential to perform at a much higher level, who just because of expedience and because of circumstances aren't allowed to educate themselves or pursue their dreams. They just have to go to work. And sometimes that work is illegal. Sometimes that work is dangerous. And so that's what I mean by untapped potential regarding poverty. With addiction, I'm part of an organization called Harmony Foundation. I'm on the board of directors, and that's an addiction facility in Estes Park, Colorado. And addiction is a huge barrier. Imagine the people who have struggled with drugs and alcohol. Imagine if that barrier was removed. Well, obviously, they're going to be performing at a much higher level in their jobs, in their lives. They won't go through divorces that they're going to go through. They're, going to keep the jobs that they've gotten. And so I see those as two real huge obstacles to people reaching their potential. And then obviously the work that I've done throughout my career around leadership development and organizational development, that's all around helping organizations enable their people so they can perform at their highest level. So like I said, when we were writing back and forth, this mission didn't appear to me until a few years ago, when I saw all of the aspects of my life, my professional life coming together, and then becoming a father. All I want for my kids is for them to unleash and untap their potential and give them opportunities. And in our country, there are just a lot of people who don't have opportunities. And if I can help people in my community, if I can create some opportunities for them, great. Then I get great satisfaction from that, and hopefully our community flourishes as well.
Yeah, wow. Like, what led you to that first, meeting that young man in prison who, made that terrible mistake, and you went in to be his mentor? Like, what led to you even starting that?
I'm the only boy in my family, and I think that I always had hoped or wished I had a big brother who could teach me sports. So I'm very athletic. I played athletics all my life. And, growing up, it was kind of like shooting baskets in the driveway by myself, or, throwing a tennis ball against the wall and fielding grounders. I was kind of by myself doing these activities. And I wished that I had a big brother who could have taught me these things. And I decided, well, I'm going to be the big brother for a kid. And so then I was like, wanted to get my feet wet. And that's when I met Teddy, who was at the detention center. And I just loved that experience. As I mentioned very early on in this conversation, I like people who are different than I am. And so I learned from him. And in fact, when we would meet on a weekly basis, I was maybe 4 or 5 years older than he was. And I had a college degree, and I knew a lot that we could talk about, teaching him reading and writing, writing and math and different things like that. But he taught me things too, things that he thought were valuable for me to learn. And, I won't go into what they were. A lot of them were criminal enterprises, but he wanted me to learn from him as well. And I just loved that experience of learning from somebody different than I was, understanding what his values were. Now, he had great loyalty. In fact, I've written about it in the past. There was an incident. Somebody threatened me when I was having dinner with him one time. He wasn't nearby, but he had this sixth sense. He was getting his food, and he was in line. His back was to me, and this guy was kind of giving me a hard time. Big kid. And Teddy just put his plate down and got in that kid's face and basically said, "You will not talk to this man. He's my tutor, And if you know,
He got your back.
it's going to be really bad for you. And so I knew he was really loyal to me, and he had values, but he just wasn't able to put them in the right direction.
Wow. So yeah, you did see a lot of potential. And I love it when like someone you mentor mentors you or teaches you something. And when you have that two-way street of learning from each other, I think that's when a lot of like positive change happens, when it goes both ways. But Don, I think it's also incredible that as someone as successful as you from early on felt the need to mentor others and be there for others that might not have saw the light like you did. You know what I mean? And I think that's incredible, testament to your character, that's a value that you've always carried with you, no matter how successful you got. You never forget about the folks who may not have had those opportunities, and you reach back and you help them out. So I think that's pretty beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I will say that I'm the leader I am because of those experiences. So while you may see this as a sacrifice or something that I've just selflessly given, I got so much out of it. I actually learned how to be a leader by interacting with some of these young people. When I was learning about motivation and how to recognize people, how to build trust, what's harder than building trust with somebody who is so different than you are, maybe by age, maybe by race, economic background? If you can build trust with those people, you can build trust with anybody. And so I started to learn these things. There's no way I would be the leader I am without those experiences and the confidence that gave me. So I got a great deal out of it. And like you said, it's a two-way street. And that's what anybody who wants to mentor, I really encourage them, because they're going to get a great deal out of it as well.
So for 12 Geniuses, first of all, you do a phenomenal job. It sounds so professional. The questions are incredible. The guests are incredible. I'm still listening to the one that you sent me, Leading Through Loss. I mean, you just talked to some incredible people. But I love what you were saying about like staying relevant, right? Like part of your podcast is staying relevant because things change so quickly nowadays. You could be on top of the world one day, a few years go by, and suddenly you're behind and you don't know how you got there. Your podcasting is expanding minds, educating people, showing the human potential, and trying to have us keep up in this rat race by showing us these experts from across the world. You also mentioned like failing, coming to addiction or depression as being an outcome of falling behind. And I was curious, was that from your own experience, or have you just seen that in others?
I've just seen it in others. So, what happens particularly with men and men of my age, let's say, if they're unable to support their family and they become irrelevant in the workforce and they get laid off or go on disability, and part of what makes them who they are, their identity, is providing for their family. If they're not able to do that, the logical steps for them would be to drink, to become depressed, and unfortunately, suicide for a lot of people. Not obviously not everybody, but I think as leaders, we have a moral obligation to prepare our people for these changes. That's why I wanted to start the podcast. That's why I wanted to explore these technologies and these social trends. Driverless cars are a thing, and they will replace many over-the-road truckers. That's just a reality. Now, I don't know specifically the time frame. Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 10 years? But if I'm a 43-year-old or 47-year-old truck driver and I need to drive for 20 more years, I probably need to reskill. As leaders, we need to prepare our people for that 3 years in advance, not 3 months in advance. That's why I started the podcast.
Wow.
I do not want a generation of people to be left behind. I want to drum on this drum and let people know we have to constantly be reinvented, constantly be learning. It's not our organization's responsibility. But as leaders, we can encourage our people to be these continuous learners. That's why I wanted to start this show. It's like, hey, you may not want these changes to happen. They're happening.
Right.
And artificial intelligence, if your job depends on being just a limited expert at one thing, an accountant or lawyer who looks up precedent, AI is going to do that. So it's not just blue collar jobs that are going to be replaced by robots or AI. It's a lot of different jobs. That's why I think polymathic thinking. So one of my titles besides CEO is polymath in training. A polymath is somebody who knows a little bit about a lot. And a real true polymath knows a lot about a lot. But I'm just kind of scratching the surface. But it's generalists who are going to succeed in the future, because robots can do a repeated thing over and over again. AI, algorithms, machine learning, those things are going to get advanced, more and more advanced, and they're going to make specialists fairly irrelevant. So be a generalist. That's what I'm hoping people will take out of this podcast.
No, I think about robots probably every day because I see something where I think, you know what, an AI could completely crush this job in 2 seconds. I think about it all the time, and I think it is concerning, with movies like The Matrix, where, how would that look? How will that future look when AI is a thing in it? And I'm pretty sure it will be a thing. Is there a way to merge the human brain with the AI, or some way to connect and merge the two? I'm sure the future is going to look completely wild one day. But you're absolutely you're absolutely right about one thing. These changes are happening. The ideas are out there. The need is out there. There's people working diligently at pushing our civilization forward. And so you're absolutely correct, Don. It's going to happen one way or another. And it kind of makes you look at skill sets differently, right? And we should look at skill sets differently, which is why, like, my skill set is communication, vision, purpose, drive, empowering others. And that's universal. I can apply those skill sets anywhere. And so I double down on those strengths that I know I can use in any setting, instead of something that's just so specific that one day might be an AI, filling out that Excel spreadsheet or whatever. What do you think the future looks like, Don?
Disruptive. So, I just I've been reflecting on the first quarter of this decade. And we don't think about decades in quarters, or maybe in halves occasionally, but the first quarter of this decade will end June 30th. So we're a quarter into the 2020s.
Oh, wow.
And my prediction is that this is the least disruptive of the 4 quarters. Think about that for a second. This is the least disruptive of the 4 quarters. What have we seen? A pandemic. We have seen a war, and we have seen, all sorts of turbulence in the stock market. We've seen turbulence in the job market. We're working from home.
And the presidency, that's been very dramatic.
Yes, thank you. Disputed presidency and an insurrection or a riot or whatever you want to call
Capital.
it.
So you're saying buckle up. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because we have to address climate change. We have to address these new technologies. Our governments are not working effectively, and we need to, this may not be welcome by a lot of people, but we need to figure out how to govern more globally. So our countries need to work together to combat climate change, because we are going to have climate migrants in much higher numbers than we've seen already, and that's already been disruptive. So immigration is a huge thing. What happens when a country like Bangladesh gets further underwater? Now, that's a country of 120 million, maybe a little bit more people. It's not a big population. Where are those people going to go? What's the moral responsibility that we have? And we, I say collectively as humanity, not the United States, not China, not Russia, not India, but we, what responsibility do we have for those people, tens of millions of people who may have to leave? We're talking about hundreds of millions of climate migrants through the end of this decade, or through the end of this this year. Some people say that it could be as many as 1 billion people having to leave their home by the end of this century. What did I say? This year, by the end of this century. And so, yeah, we're going to see an incredible amount of disruption. Now, what I want people to understand is that's bad. That kind of headline is really bad, but there's incredible opportunity in here as well. I see climate, just this one track, climate as the greatest threat to humanity and the greatest economic opportunity ever in human history. In human history. So think about the technology revolution that's been going on for decades now. Addressing climate change, the innovations, the thousands and thousands of innovations that are going to occur will be the greatest economic opportunity ever. So there's going to be a lot of disruption. We're going to have to be agile. We're going to have to be flexible. And I mean that individually, organizationally, governmentally. But there's great opportunity. If you're ready, if you're prepared, if you're thinking about these changes. So I see it, I'm very optimistic about the future. I think, you kind of alluded to human brain interfaces and, interacting with artificial intelligence, all that's going to happen without a doubt. We're on the cusp of a human evolution. Human beings will evolve in a very significant way, something that we haven't seen since, maybe we transitioned from primates. It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts.
That's amazing.
I can't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth, but that's what I see for the future. It's
like science fiction come to life. It's like the whole art imitates life and life imitates art. A lot of those seeds that we planted, those ideas in our minds are going to happen. What man conceives, he can achieve. That's what my dad always said.
That's great. That's a great line. And it's absolutely true.
Okay. So Don, you've passed on a tremendous amount of knowledge. You've shown us the unique and incredible person, the entrepreneur that you are, helping others, thinking ahead. You have a crazy, awesome top-down view of humanity and where we're headed. You're always looking forward. So there's just so much to learn from you. I think you're going to be one of my mentors, hopefully. And I retire in 3 years. So, hey, you need someone to work for you. Let me know.
Sounds good.
Okay. So my last 3 questions for you are just personal to you, just based on what I've read about you. I wrote them ahead of time. So first question, as we wrap it up here, is which guest really stuck with you the most? I know all your guests are incredible. As a fellow podcaster, I'm not going to pick favorites, right? We love all the people we talk to, but was there any one of those conversations that just stuck with you and you often go back to thinking about it?
There are too many to choose from, but I will pick one because I do have some favorites, probably 8 or 10 out of 90 or so. The one that was remarkable to me is with Brother Ali. And for those of you who don't know Brother Ali, he's a hip hop artist from Minnesota. And he's my favorite living musician. So just to give some context, James Brown is my favorite all-time musician. And Brother Ali is next.
Nice.
And James Brown's passed on. So Brother Ali is my favorite living musician. He's blind and he's Muslim. I just mentioned those 2 things for a couple of reasons. One, because he's blind, I was able to pick him up at his home and drive him to his studio. And now imagine meeting your favorite musician. He and I didn't have a relationship prior to this. And now I get to pick him up at his home, see where he lives, see his wife, and then have a spontaneous conversation for 20 minutes to the studio. And then I drove him back. So
That's
we
incredible.
talked about all sorts of different things. And I gave him my favorite book to give away, which is Man's Search for Meaning. I typically have a bunch of copies on hand and I give them away to people I meet for the first time. And just as an aside here, if I have a bunch of copies at home, if somebody wants a free copy and is in the United States, email future@12geniuses.com and I'll mail one to you. while supplies last.
Wow,
So I probably
that's
got
awesome.
a dozen or so copies. Anyway, we had this great conversation. I mentioned he's Muslim. I am not. And Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, Jewish. And we talked about martyrdom. And so we just had this deep conversation, to the studio, but more on the way back, because we had an 80-minute recording session, and we talked about creativity and how his religion influenced his art. But the thing that probably most influenced me is, he said, if you are creating something and you're not doing it for yourself, if you're doing it for popularity, if you're doing it because you think that's what the audience wants, it's going to fail. It completely changed the way I approach my podcast. And this is 3 seasons in, so it was about half the episodes ago. And so, just to kind of wrap it up, now I interview people I want to talk to, not necessarily who I think the audience wants to hear from. And I have the conversations I want to have. And if people want to listen, they'll listen. I think there are enough people around the world, 8 billion people. I think there are enough people who are going to listen to a podcast that's really authentic and is really what I truly want to explore. And so that kind of changed the way that I approach my creation, my art.
What was his name?
Brother Ali.
I'm gonna look him up. I've never heard of him, but I can't wait to look him up.
He
sounds awesome.
Really, really fascinating guy. I think he's albino. I think he's white, but he was raised by African-American women. So he's just this really interesting.
Wow. There's no one else like him.
There's no one else like him. And kind, thoughtful. But when you see him on stage, I've never seen stage presence like
wow.
It's amazing. I've been
That's
to a bunch of his shows. Being from Minnesota, I've had an opportunity to see him live many times. And he's just got an incredible stage presence. He's a lion on stage, but he was a lamb talking to me, couldn't be sweeter and kinder. So I just had a great experience with it.
That's beautiful. And that's the beauty of podcasting, that those purposeful conversations lead to some incredible moments. Okay. Next question. Do you have any success stories for an underprivileged child or person that you've worked for that was just like, you guys just connected and you really truly elevated that person?
I'll give 2 examples. Since we talked about Teddy at the very beginning, he was in the juvenile detention center. And I think it's kind of an interesting, ending to the story. We actually, after he got out, which he served about 8 years after, and we wrote the whole time back and forth while he was in. And his mom wrote to me too, which was really cool. Being able to, she was so grateful that I was spending time with him. And well, I drove down to Kansas City after he got out, and we spent the day together. And first of all, Kansas City is quite segregated, or at least where he lived, quite segregated. So, I got out of my car and everybody was looking at me like, what are you doing here? I think I was the only white guy, in that neighborhood.
My last base was Missouri. I'm familiar with Kansas City, and yeah, you do need to know the lay of the land a little bit to navigate it.
So I rolled in, and I just got some strange looks, like not threatening looks, but like, you don't belong here type things. So I was like, okay, well, this is new for me, but I was fine. It was middle of the day. I walked up, knocked on his door, and there he is. And I told you he was an athletic guy and a strong guy. He probably went into prison 185 pounds. He probably came out of prison 235.
Oh my God.
Just chiseled. And he grabbed me, and we had never hugged because you couldn't touch each other in prison or in the detention center. He grabbed me and he just bear hugged me. And I was like, wow, like
that's incredible.
Years apart. And, I was like his brother.
What an incredible relationship. I mean, you stayed in touch with them that whole time. That's just unreal.
So we spent the day together. He took me to the record store and we had lunch together. We went to see a movie. I met his girlfriend. It was just a great experience, I think, for both of us. And I've not seen him since. So he reoffended shortly after that. I did talk to his mom afterwards, but he reoffended and he went to prison then again for 20 years. And he just got out right around the beginning of the pandemic. And I've tried to get in touch with him, but I haven't. But anyway, that experience was really rewarding. Knowing that what I perceived as love was shown to me as love. And this is a tough guy. Like,
right.
I mean, if you look at his rap sheet while he was in prison, it's just like aggravated assault and all of these different offenses. But we connected, and he had love. He had this ability to love. So anybody who's going to tell you that, they can't be saved, they're no good, that has not been my experience. The other success story that I would note is my most recent little brother is now 27. So we've been together almost 20 years. When he was 9, we were matched. And we ended up starting a nonprofit. It's no longer a nonprofit, but an organization for kids in his neighborhood. And it's basketball and football. We got, some of my people together and some of his people as coaches. So I provided help getting financing, and we created a football and basketball organization that at its peak. So even a year ago, we had 120 kids from his neighborhood involved.
Wow.
And, yeah.
That's
so
unreal.
He saw, what I was providing him, and he wanted to scale it for his whole neighborhood, kind of teach some of the lessons that I taught him, but he wanted to do it at a much bigger level. So those are a couple of
wow, it's like putting your superpowers together, like his purpose, his drive, his passion meets your knowledge on how to execute that mission. Like, it's just like putting the superpowers together, the Avengers together, and you guys are making like magic happen. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. It was particularly rewarding being able to start that with him. And then eventually he wanted to take it in a different direction. So we ended the nonprofit, and it's still going. So, they still have a football team and a basketball team. They just completed basketball and they're doing spring football right now. And it's a great service to that community because middle school sports got cut. A lot of these kids don't have childcare after school. And so this gives them an opportunity to be in a safe environment and build camaraderie and learn from some of the coaches. And so it's a great program.
Definitely. Those sports teach a lot of valuable life lessons that at that early age is just monumental to their character, as they get older. So that's incredible. Don, last question for you. What's your thoughts on happiness?
My thoughts are that far too few people understand it and know that it's within their control. And what I mean by that, there's a formula. There's a happiness formula. And when I do public speaking, I often talk about this. Half of our happiness is determined, there's a genetic set point. And so some of us lose that genetic lottery, but most of us have enough of a genetic set point to be happy. So if half of it's predetermined, what's the other half? And the other half is comprised of circumstances and intentional activity. Now, 10% of our overall happiness is determined by circumstances. Most people would get that wrong. I should say, many people will get that wrong. Many people will say, I'll be happy when I get a college degree, when I get that new car, when I get a new home, when I have a partner, when we have a family. That's the wrong way to approach it.
Yeah, I've sadly had to learn that the hard way.
And me too. But happiness is not dictated by our circumstances. So half is genetic set point, 10% is circumstances, 40% is intentional activity. What are you doing? What choices are you making? So here's a choice. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch TV, or I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to eat a bag of potato chips, or I'm going to eat a handful of nuts or some fruit. I am going to call a friend, or I'm going to mindlessly play a game on my phone. What choices are you making? I didn't learn these things until I was about 30 years old. There's a guy by the name of George Raveling. Some people may know who he is. He's a legendary basketball coach. He coached at the University of Iowa. He coached at USC. And somehow I got introduced to him, and we have had a couple of phone calls and emailed back and forth. One time I heard him say, I wake up, by the way, he's 83 or 84 years old. I wake up every day and I have a choice to make, just one choice. Am I going to have a good day, or am I going to have a great day?
Oh, I like that.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah, I didn't think you were going in that direction. You threw me off.
So he said that by this point, if I haven't figured out, at worst, my day is going to be good. And at best, I can choose to have a great day. It all depends on him. He's making that choice. Now, that's mindset. And I teach that to my daughters. I've been asking them that question as we drive to school every day. And, they've been going to Montessori since they were 6 months old. And so I have a few minutes in the car with them. There's not a day that goes by when I don't ask them, are you going to have a good day or a great day? That's their only choice, Josh.
Wow.
No bad days. Of course, there are bad days. Of course, there are bad days. You lose somebody. That's a bad day. But generally, if you can choose to have a good day or a great day, you're going to be a happy human being.
Wow.
So think about that formula. Think about this. I mentioned Viktor Frankl earlier. He wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, when I read that, I was about 30 years old. What that meant to me is I choose whether I am happy. I don't let circumstances dictate that. And when you understand that, it unlocks and unleashes incredible possibilities. And, I've made $6,000 a year. I've made $60,000, and I've made a lot more than that. And I've been happy in every one of those circumstances.
Wow.
Because I've learned these.
Because you chose to.
And the thing with Viktor Frankl is he wrote that shortly. I think he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 11 days. He wrote it after being in a concentration camp, Josh, seeing death all around him. And for him to have that kind of mindset, to understand and to share with the world that happiness is something that we can control, that's amazing. Amazing.
That's unbelievable.
There are people who truly have demons and mental health challenges. And, I feel great empathy for them. But for most of us, if we learn these things, we can be happy. And my definition of success is happiness. Happiness generally while serving others, but happiness nonetheless.
Absolutely. Wow, Don, that was incredibly insightful to think that something that most of us take for granted as something out of our control, when in fact we're the ones steering the ship, right? We're the ones deciding how we feel at any given moment. And it does take practice. And I think it also takes momentum. I think you could build momentum going up and down, right? So if you push yourself with addiction, depression, and you get far enough down, it's going to be that much harder to climb out. And then same for going up. Once you feel that momentum, you're firing on all cylinders, you're happy, your family's happy, you're changing lives. That's momentum too. Mm-hmm. I call it showing up for yourself. And I started making Hero Front merch at one point just because it was fun. And on the back, I put show up. I showed up for myself. That's exactly what you were saying. It meant I did that run instead of scrolling through Facebook. Yeah. I had yogurt and granola versus that McMuffin that I wanted so bad. So it's showing up for yourself. It's it's taking the tougher path to invest in your future happiness, right? You got to earn it.
Tony Hsieh wrote a book a number of years ago. Tony was CEO of Zappos. And unfortunately, he passed away maybe 3 years ago. Young guy, very dynamic guy. But he wrote a book And he shared a model in the book. He said, there are 3 levels of happiness. The first level is pleasure. And you talked about that a little bit, like we do get some pleasure scrolling through Facebook, and we do get pleasure from food or sex or drugs or alcohol. That's pleasure. And that's not sustainable, right? It's just not. And so that pleasure actually becomes a burden. Now, in moderation, it can be great, right? I still like to have a beer. I work in the addiction field, as a board member, but I haven't gone through recovery and I can still enjoy it. But if I'm drinking every day, every weekend, that becomes a burden. And then there's the next level, which is passion. And you've been passionate about certain things. Maybe you've dated somebody and, you're excited to see that person. There's chemical reactions there as well. Maybe you're passionate about a football team or sports or cars or whatever. But that generally wears off as well. And then there's purpose. And we talked about purpose. And that's sustainable. When you know your purpose and you're able to fulfill that, when I'm working with people to kind of unlock and remove barriers to them reaching their full potential, I couldn't be happier.
That's it, man. That's the ticket right there. You cracked the code, Don.
For free.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna watch this like 10 times in a row. But Don, as we wrap it up here, I just want to tell you that I had a feeling you were going to be a very interesting guest with interesting insight, and you've exceeded all those expectations. I mean, you're just an incredible guy. You're a forward thinker. You think outside the box. But at the same time, you're not like the others that I've met like you. You also have this incredible passion for helping others. And so you're just such a well-rounded and dynamic leader. And you have a podcast. I mean, you're an incredible person, Don. I'm greatly inspired by you, and I'm honored to know you and to have talked to you today. So thank you so much for coming on Hero Front and giving us some of that really insightful wisdom that you have.
My pleasure, Josh.
All right. Take care, everybody.